Okay. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation about the Times News project Meth Mountain. I'm Rob Walters, managing editor of the newspaper. With me are some of the reporters who worked on the project. Starting over here is Mike Still, who covers Southwest Virginia. Matthew Lane, I'm not going to call him Mike. Matthew Lane covers the city of Kingsport and was the lead reporter on the project. And Rick Wagner, who covers education. So thank you for joining us, and we just want to have a conversation about the project, and like for folks to hear from the reporters who spent the last 6 months producing 21 stories, 13 videos, and a bunch of information. Gentlemen, the first question I have is, we'll start with Matthew with this. What was the most interesting part of this story? What did you find to be the most interesting part?
Well, there was a lot of interesting parts, but probably the one thing that stood out to me was the number of overdoses that are actually taking place in Sullivan County. And I think that number is going to top 70 this year. Last year it was 60. That comes out to 1 every 6 days, roughly. And if it doesn't affect you or your family, it's something you probably don't even realize. And it really hit home when I was talking to Assistant District Attorney Gene Perrin at the end days of the series, and I go there and talk to him just briefly. And while we're there, he takes a call from the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office saying there had been another overdose just then, just at that time.
Overdose death. Yeah,
an overdose death that had just taken place that day, just a couple of weeks ago. And it just really hit home, that number and the fact that it happens so often.
Mike, what was the most interesting to you?
Well, one of the ironic things was actually getting time to talk to prosecutors and police because they were so tied up with cases that actually involved meth. And people think it's just a case for possession case, distribution case with meth, but we had a child abuse case. Meth use by the accused came into it as part of one of the factors in the death of the woman's child. Not one of the complete factors, but one of several. And also just from watching this, from 27 years, covering, I'm a general assignment reporter, so it's not my main beat, but covering cases first of OxyContin in the early aughts, hearing about meth labs being 20-ounce bottles, soda bottles, and now just how industrial the quantities and distribution of meth are. Ironically, I hate to say it, it's probably not the best term, but it's actually a well-oiled business as opposed to home cooking 10 years ago, and that ought to be depressing enough for anybody reading about this.
Rick?
One of the things that I never had really thought about was the secondary effects of methamphetamine and other drug use. And I talked to school counselors and counselors for frontier health, and I also talked to the Boys and Girls Club, and they all have programs and processes to try to help young children, students, those who are basically up to high school age, and how it affects them. Some of them withdraw if they have parents or older siblings or folks around them using. Some of them act out. Some of them become suicidal, and they've got a whole range of things that they have to deal with. And when I first heard that meth wasn't a big deal among school-age children, I thought, well, I won't have a whole lot to write about, but I had a lot to write about because there's a lot of folks out there trying to help these kids that are being affected. They're sort of the secondary effects of everything. I hadn't really thought about that until I did these stories.
Different way, what surprised you the most?
Probably what surprised me the most, one of the police chief or one of the prosecutors was talking about how they estimate 90% of crimes involve drugs, and not just people buying and selling drugs. They're breaking into people's homes to steal stuff, to buy drugs. It's domestic cases where drugs are involved. I knew drugs were probably a large part, but I didn't realize it was that much, and the amount of caseload in the court system that also involves drugs in some capacity. That really surprised me, that number alone.
Mike?
I think talking again with police and sheriff's offices, I think the one concern is the level of violence now that's associated with handling these cases, and dealing with people. You know, it's not just normal, person resisting arrest. They have severe concerns about that. Ironically, 15 years ago, police were concerned about the hazmat aspects of doing a meth bust. And ironically, they say they're not quite as concerned about that with meth now. Again, because it's industrial, it's well distributed, there's not that much manufacturing going on, but the quantities of pure crystal meth in the area, it's kind of trade-off you really don't want. You don't want either problem.
Right.
So.
Rick, what surprised you?
I think one thing that surprised me is when I interviewed the folks at Shades of Grace, which is a United Methodist Church in downtown Kingsport, a storefront church that, if you will, caters or helps serve the homeless population. I was surprised how much they dealt with folks who were having issues. One man came in before the pandemic, basically passed out, and for all intents and purposes died at the church. Fell down on the floor. They gave him a Narcan kit, and he came back to life. And about 2 months later, the same thing happened with the same man. They also had a porta potty that went up in flames because someone was trying to cook meth, which I thought, like Mike said, was sort of something you don't do much anymore, even if you're wanting it. And a woman was out doing some things without any clothes on in downtown, and they, Will Shuey, the minister there, Reverend Shuey, he said that happened a whole lot more than you would expect it to, which I'd heard of it that one time. That really surprised me that's going on in downtown Kingsport.
If I may add, you mentioned Narcan. They're having Narcan parties. That is just something that I would not have thought of at the beginning of this process, but that actually takes place.
Well, like every interview I went on, there was a Narcan kit. Practically all of them, except the counselors, they didn't have one, but they were not in the school, they were at their office. But I was sort of amazed at the Boys and Girls Club, they have them, and at Shades of Grace, they keep them on hand at all times.
Matthew, what did you learn that you didn't know before?
I did not know what fentanyl was. I had no clue. I knew what meth was. I knew what OxyContin was, but when they start talking about fentanyl and what it does and how quickly it can kill you, that was eye-opening for me. I had no idea what that was.
Mike?
Fentanyl, I'd heard of it, just the volume of it out there. Basically it's kind of like playing with curare. You wouldn't think somebody would be playing with something that dangerous, so it's like a hand grenade. Oh yeah, we'll cut whatever with it and mix it. If I were an addict, I would hope that I would be a lot smarter to avoid that.
Rick?
One thing I didn't realize is that some of the folks who have died of overdoses and those who have just died without anybody in the family to help take care of the final arrangements, that Shades of Grace, in cooperation with the Lutheran Church up near Bluntville, have a program where they once a year have a big memorial service, and I think they interred 17 folks who had been cremated. And I had always heard of pauper cemeteries through the years, but I never knew that there was a process for people who needed that, or who didn't have any family and whose remains needed to be taken care of. They have a very respectful memorial there every October, I believe, October-November time frame.
We'll start with Matthew again. What do you want readers to know about the project?
I want readers to know that I believe the community, law enforcement, judges, healthcare professionals, there's a lot of people who is on board with acknowledging this problem and with coming up with a solution. A lot of the comments that I hear online is something needs to be done or they're not taking it seriously. I think they're taking it seriously. I think they have for quite a while behind the scenes. And I want the readers to know that they seem to have a plan in place with the regional treatment facility and getting that up and running. And I believe we're serious about doing it, especially since state government's acknowledging it and seem to be on board with the idea.
Mike?
Like Matthew said, the authorities are doing all they can with the resources they have. But I think that publicly we all ought to realize it's not their problem, it's all of our problem. And it's not just, we'll have somebody take care of it. Everybody needs to get involved in some way. We're dealing with this, whether you've got an addict in your household, whether you sit there and wonder, why you think something isn't being done. Well, you're part of the community. You need to step up as well.
I think people just need to realize that if you know someone or if you yourself are having issues with meth or other controlled substances, that there's a lot of help out there and people are aware of the problem. Also, if you're just an average citizen and maybe you don't have any direct impact from this, if you think the regional treatment facility is something that should move forward, talk to your local government officials, because a lot of the local governments right now are discussing what's going to happen with the baby doe that will get settlement money. And there's a plan out there that was well outlined in our articles about that. So I just be aware of it. And if you know somebody who needs help or you yourself need help, reach out, because there's all kinds of avenues and all different kinds of programs out there, faith-based and otherwise, to help you.
One thing, there's always that not in my backyard attitude about this thing. Well, the problem is in everyone's backyard. So, if you're worried about treatment resources being near your neighborhood or something like that, well, you've already got a problem in your backyard.
Yeah, if you live around here, look at the map that was in, I can't remember which day, the one where the drug crimes were centered, and you can see that there's a pretty good epicenter there that's very, very close to where we are sitting right now.
Matthew, can you talk a little bit about the road to recovery and the facility and,
Yeah, sure.
and why things are so complicated, why it's just not as easy as turning over the keys?
Well, the property is an old it's called the Carter County Annex, and they stopped using it earlier this year because it was deemed unnecessary, basically. And it's a good facility, it's a nice facility, the state owns it, and it's been identified as a perfect location, able to accommodate 180 people. And it's ready to go. It just needs some approval at the state level, and that can be done a number of ways. It doesn't have to go through the state legislature. So it just needs basically regional support. I believe the state wants to see as many governments and entities on board with that project, and I believe that they will move forward with it and handing it over to someone to turn into a facility within the next couple of years. But it's going to happen quicker than, say, the normal government process, but it's still going to take some time and work to do it and to bring all the partners in to offer all the services that they need to offer.
Let's start with Rick this time. Rick, what was the most memorable quote?
Probably when I was interviewing the Reverend Will Shuey at Shades of Grace, and I asked him if he happened to have a video of the woman who, Sam's Clothing, was out dancing in back alley and apparently all over downtown Kingsport, that he got reports of. And he says, no, we didn't save that video. That happens a lot more than you would think. Not necessarily that, but folks under the influence of something. And I drive through downtown Kingsport about every day of my life, and I grew up in this region, and it just never dawned on me that, folks were, usually you think of them in the back alleys, and in fact this was an alley, but you think of them sort of hiding. But in that case, I guess it sort of came home to roost for me in that way. Just a thought.
Mike, what was the most memorable quote?
Well, it's probably from Dr. Art Van Zee, well known if you've seen the cable series Dope Sick or read the book. He's been involved with substance abuse treatment now for more than 2 decades. And we talked about the progression of addiction from oxycodone and OxyContin in the early aughts. And when we got to talk about meth and treatment, he basically said that there is no good treatment for meth addiction. And, you know, to have somebody that's worked in substance abuse that long and a well-known authority to have that look, you know, have that take on it, that
Yeah.
ought to be scary enough for anybody.
Yeah.
I believe it was one of the DAs who talked about this, when they said the deadliness of the meth was a selling point for the dealers. That shocked me. Because you'd think that dealers wouldn't want their clients or their patrons to die, but apparently that is a selling point, that it's so good that it could literally kill you, and everybody wanted it. That really stunned me.
Can you talk about why we called the project Meth Mountain?
Sure, that was during the interview with the DAs, and they were talking about how the meth makes its way from across the border to the larger cities, up to and through our area. And I believe it was in Atlanta. The people in Atlanta, they deal with the people from here, and they say, "Oh, you're from Meth Mountain." That's just a nickname they give our area because meth is so prevalent here, and of course we have the mountains. So that's stuck. We found references to it online as well in the past. So it is something that they call our area.
I'll just open this up for everybody. The news team, essentially 5 reporters, spent a little more than 6 months reporting this. Can you just describe all the sources and folks we talked to? Just give an idea.
On my side, we work with the Wise County Commonwealth Attorney's Office, officers from the Southwest Virginia Regional Drug Task Force, state police. Spoke with a few people that I actually knew in Wise County, and they had anecdotes like Rick did. One gentleman said that his wife told him one night, you know, there's somebody downstairs, and he goes down, there's a woman in the house, and she's talking about how she had just paid for the house and that she was in there checking it, and what was he doing in there. And just mentioned that the police officer came in and actually was well trained enough not to agitate her, but just a whole, you know, a lot of anecdotal information. In Virginia, source information is a little harder than criminal statistics because they don't separate methamphetamine out from Schedule 1 and 2. You know, sometimes you're lucky the indictments will specify meth-related crime. So even the source material is still kind of hard to go through right now, but I hear the state is changing that reporting.
My sources are probably greater than most everybody else's because I was the lead on this project, but I spoke to police chiefs, sheriffs, vice officers with both departments, officers in Hawkins County, district attorneys. I talked to a number of judges. There's sort of 3 or 4 that's sort of leading the charge here on this regional treatment facility and recovery court. I spoke to a couple of recovering addicts. We all spoke to Frontier Health, United Way officials, and state agency, Tennessee Department of Health, along with numerous online sources, TBI, DEA, some other websites that track this sort of information and keep meth stats and drug stats and overdose stats. So it was probably 20 or so sources that I reached out to.
And I just wanted to mention that everybody was on the record, all real names on the record. So, Rick.
I spoke to Frontier Health, but from the school counselor point of view. Also spoke to a middle school counselor. That middle school is sort of a bridge between elementary and high school, obviously, and she gave some good insights. I talked with Shades of Grace, Reverend Will Shuey, and his staff and some other folks there, and the Boys and Girls Club, which has an older program that goes back into the 80s, but it's been sort of retooled. It's targeted teen pregnancy, drug use, and sort of self-esteem issues, among other things, and they really retooled it to address meth and other drugs. Vaping, I found out among students right now, the main concern of the counselors is that vaping, and they said that in some cases, drugs like fentanyl can make it into vaping, which sounds insane, but fentanyl can be very deadly in almost any concentration, but especially in a high one. So, and I talked to a lot of people that I wasn't interviewing, and I got basically the same story. Everybody I interviewed was on the record, but like he said, I think that there's the undercurrent that sort of supported what I got on the record, what we put in the record.
All right, we'll just go around one more time for final thoughts. We'll start with Mike.
Again, referring to Art Van Zee, one thing he mentioned, which, again, kind of depressing, he just mentioned, talked about how meth has become more prevalent now than OxyContin. And what he said was, well, it's the drug of opportunity.
It's filling the void left by the opioids.
Right, and it's not even filling the void, it's because people you would expect who use opioids may not fall into meth addiction. It's a whole new segment of society, but it's the drug of demand now.
Yeah. Is there a typical person you find who overdoses?
I believe we were told that, no, not really. I mean, there's people of all ages, all socioeconomic backgrounds that get involved with meth. It's people who have had surgeries, white collar, blue collar. I believe they mentioned the 70-year-old person who been addicted to meth. But some of the stories I heard from the recovering addicts were hopeful and promising.
The problem with addiction hits home with the Time News. You want to talk about Alan's story a little bit?
I can, briefly. One of our owner's son gave a very strong and powerful testimony in day 4, I believe it was, about his challenges and struggles with recovery, and it was from the heart, and it was good. I believe it was a good addition to the series to give that personal touch to it.
Yeah. So. Rick, final thoughts?
I think one thing that stuck out in my mind related to the gentleman who died twice at Shades of Grace and came back twice was, if I'm not mistaken, Barry Stalvis told us that they would have meth parties and they would have someone with the Narcan kit standing by. And he said there was one man who died like that 4 times, but he only came back 3.
Mm-hmm.
He died because each time you have to have a higher and higher and higher dosage. And that just sort of struck me. And then when I was told that it happened at Shades of Grace twice, it just, that was something I had never really thought about. But, I mean, fortunately we have Narcan, but unfortunately it is used in a way to help people get higher and higher, and at some point it doesn't end well.
It emboldens them, they said.
But without the Narcan, we would have
Right.
death after death after death, so I don't know what the best answer is.
So, well, thank you very much for joining us on timesnews.net. And if you want to find any of the stories, you can find them all on our website. That's timesnews.net. Thank you very much.